Friday the 13th, The Carnival, Chapter 5, Bad Vibes. Bzzz. Early Friday morning at Crystal Lake, no one was up except the mosquitoes, one of which was buzzing around the electric fence that circled the fairgrounds, and snap! There was a loud cracking sound as the bug flew too close to the metal links. Like an electronic bug trap, the fence zapped the bug. Meanwhile, Maxie opened her eyes, staring up at the ceiling of her dorm room. That's odd, she thought. She didn't usually sleep on her back. She yawned luxuriously, then smiled. She must have fallen asleep holding hands with the man beside her, because she could still feel his large, strong fingers interlaced with hers, and her heart seized mid-beat. The man beside her! She jerked her head to her left and found herself staring straight into Jason Voorhees' white-masked face. She started to scream as the long, shiny blade plunged down again and again, and Maxie woke up with a loud gasp. She sat bolt upright, her chest heaving. She had to say the words aloud. Just a dream. Then she started to laugh. She turned to look at her tiny digital alarm clock, just as the 5:59 flipped over into 6 a.m. Wow, early. She knew she wasn't going back to sleep either. Not after that nightmare. Friday afternoon at the Crystal Lake campsite. Selina Tokar, the gypsy fortune-teller's teenage daughter, was strolling past a row of trailers, heading for the center cabin, which she and her mom were sharing. She had just taken a dunk in the lake. The water was shockingly cold considering the intense summer heat, but she felt better for having had the swim. Refreshed and chipper, better than she'd felt since they arrived. Maybe this place wasn't as gloomy and awful as she thought. Then she saw the dog. It was Mitch's dog, Stump. He was pawing and whimpering at the door to Mitch's van. There was something mournful and desperate about the way the animal was whining. More like a crying child than a dog. She started toward the dog, then hesitated. Selina was a tall 17-year-old with frizzy dark hair, which she wore pulled back tightly in a thick ponytail. She had dark eyes and dark eyebrows. She didn't like the eyebrows. She thought they gave her face a raccoon quality. Guys didn't seem to think so. With her lithe frame and olive skin, Selina had been getting more attention these last couple of years than she'd known what to do with. But no one had ever made her feel queasy and uncomfortable the way Mitch Deaver did. The way he leered at her. He made Selina feel dirty, like they had already done something together, something filthy. Which is why she hesitated when she saw the dog. She didn't want to go anywhere near Mitch's van. Poor dog, she said. Stump turned to look at her, panting, then turned back to paw the door some more. The dog turned back so quickly Selina didn't see the red foam around Stump's mouth. Here, Selina said, as she stepped over to the door. Stump went nuts, nearly knocking her over. She tried the knob. The door was locked. Sorry, she told the dog. I can't help you. She tried to pat the dog's head, but the animal pulled away as if frightened. Shrugging, Selina started on through the clearing, heading toward the center cabin. She was halfway across the field when she heard rusty hinges rasping and, looking up, saw her mother opening the cabin screen door. Though it had only been a few hours since she'd seen her mom, Selina whistled and waved. Like her daughter, Madame Zaviria, her real name was Helen, wore her dark hair pulled back tightly. But while Selina tied her hair with a sunny piece of orange yarn, Madame Zaviria used a black plastic butterfly clamp. She was a striking woman, but years of scowling had marred her beauty. She stared blankly across the field at Selina, as if she didn't recognize her own child. And as Selina came closer, she saw that her mom's face was almost gray. She felt a sudden panic grip her, cold fingers closing around her throat. She started to run. Mom, what is it? She hurried to her mother's side, reaching out to her, but Madame Zaviria pushed her away. She sat down heavily on the wooden porch's bottom step. She got up again almost immediately, walked unsteadily around to the side of the porch, and, dropping to her knees in the grass, began to vomit. Selina held her mother while the poor woman retched. After a moment, Madame Zaviria stood up again. She was looking even paler than before. She wiped her face with her olive-skinned hands. Selina's heart was pounding. "Mom, are you okay?" Selina said. "Mm-hmm. What is it? Something you ate?" Madame Zaviria took her hands down. Her eyes were yellowish, her face pasty. "I was just lying down for a second, and I started getting these stabbing pains." "Jesus, where, Mom?" "All over, but one after another, like they really was someone stabbing me, you know. And when I managed to stand up—" Madame Zaviria closed her eyes. "When you stood up, what, Mom?" "There was blood, Selina, a lot of it." "Oh, God, blood! You're bleeding? Where?" Her mother shook her head. "No, not my blood. It was all over the cabin." She sighed heavily. "People have died in that cabin. More than one." Selina stared at her mother for a moment, then patted her shoulder. "Hold on." She clattered up the rotting wooden steps and charged into the dark cabin. The smell of old wood and dank air hit her hard. The air was so thick in here, it was almost like a presence. Her eyes flicked around quickly. The metal bunk beds, her black trunk, her sneakers. She started. The sneakers were sitting on the floor about a foot apart, toes splayed outward as if someone, a ghost, was standing inside of them. The illusion lasted only an instant. Then once again they were just a pair of ratty old Converse sneakers. There was no blood anywhere. She came back outside, grabbing the screen door before it could bang shut. Her mother was sitting on the bottom step, her back to her. Madame Zaviria was only in her 40s. But right then, looking down at the woman's slight figure, Selina felt a horrible pang at the thought of ever losing her. "Looks okay now, Mom," Selina said. "Listen, you know what I think we're looking at? It's the heat. It's making everyone sick. Come on, I'm taking you to Molly." Molly Meacham was, for obvious reasons, the fat lady in the carnival sideshow display of freaks. But she was also a kind and talented nurse, and she ran an infirmary for the other carnies out of her van. "No, no," Madame Zavira said vaguely. "I'm really—" "Yes," Selina interrupted firmly. She gripped her mother's arm and helped her to her feet. In front of the cabin there was a hole, freshly dug. Looked like Stump had done some digging, Selina thought. She led her mom around the hole and across the clearing, making a beeline for Molly's red and tan truck. They were only partway across the clearing when Madame Zaviria pushed her daughter's hand away and stopped short. She turned, staring back at the cabin. "What?" Selina asked. "You see something. What?" But her mother didn't answer. Selina took her hand and, gently tugging, led the gypsy away. Mitch's walkie-talkie crackled. "Deaver?" Mitch wiped the sweat from his forehead with one hairy forearm. He pressed the talk button. "Yeah?" "Get over here by the carousel, would you? Over." Mitch sighed. The last thing he needed right now was another problem. He pressed the talk button again. "What's up?" "Oh, Stu and Carl had a fight." He grinned. Unbelievable. It was the third fist fight today. "All right," he said. "Anybody die?" "Very funny. Stu pushed Carl into the fence. Carl's got these horrible burn marks all over his back. Fantana's screaming bloody murder. Says you set the voltage on the fence too high." It wasn't the first complaint Mitch had gotten about the fence. He had checked the power setting on the fence 2 times already. It was set on low. On the other hand, Mitch had brushed against the fence a couple of times himself, in the course of moving things around the cramped fairgrounds. And damn if he hadn't gotten a bigger shock today than he had yesterday. Much bigger. It was like the fence was drawing power straight up out of the ground. It wasn't just the fence Mitch had to worry about. Rides kept breaking. First, the block slipped on the water slide, so the ride wasn't level. Then the scrambler had a power surge and shorted out. As soon as Mitch fixed one thing, his walkie-talkie barked out an order for him to fix something else. Right now, he was standing outside the House of Death, the carnival's fun house. According to the operator, the guillotine in the Chamber of Horrors had jammed. "I checked the fence," Mitch said into his walkie-talkie. Well, check it again, damn it. Over. Mitch shook his head and raised the walkie-talkie over his head, cocking his arm to throw it with all of his might. Then he saw the funhouse ride operator watching him, grinning. He slowly lowered the walkie-talkie and snapped it back onto his wide leather belt. He climbed into the funhouse's first car and waved. A moment later, the car jerked forward. The quickest way for Mitch to get to the Chamber of Horrors was to go through the haunted house's maze of tunnels and catwalks. But Mitch was too tired for that. He needed a rest. He laid his head back against the car's leather cushions as the car rolled forward and pushed through the funhouse entrance. A swinging set of wooden doors. Instantly, the bright, hot afternoon sun was gone, and Mitch was plunged into musty darkness. Thank God it was a couple of degrees cooler in here, at least. The car swooped down so fast that Mitch's stomach heaved. That first dip always got a scream from the kiddies. Then the car climbed slowly up a long hill past grisly sights on either side. Bloody hands holding candles in wall sconces, floating green eyes gleaming in the darkness, heads swinging on ropes. The only trouble with all these effects was that you could see the paint on them. Nothing looked real enough to be scary. "Welcome to the House of Death," intoned a deep voice over a nearby speaker. The voice laughed wildly. Also rinky-dink, thought Mitch. At $1.50, 6 ride tickets, the ride was way overpriced. That's why, when Mitch had time off, he liked to hang out in the haunted house's first room, the Wax Museum. As the sound effects tape announced, some of the world's greatest monsters were displayed here. Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman. Mitch liked to hide among the wax figures, sitting deathly still and staring straight ahead as each car went by. Then he'd turn and scream right in the kids' faces. Those kids got their money's worth, that was for sure. Mitch chuckled just thinking about it. Hell, they should have someone in here doing that all the damn time. After the Wax Museum came the Vampire Bat Belfry, where furry strips hung down from the ceiling and slapped you softly in the face. A few small bats hung upside down in the crevices of the walls, their wings mechanically opening and closing. Overhead, a huge black vampire bat wheeled jerkily through the darkness on a wire, its fangs painted red. But the artist had done a sloppy job. There was a big splotch of white plastic showing on the bat's head. Bogus. Totally bogus. Mitch leaned back, letting his aching body relax as he rode through the funeral chapel. Here, the arrival of the car depressed a lever, which in turn made the lid on a coffin creak open. Out rose a skeleton, his jaw opening and closing to match the soundtrack of ghastly laughter barking from the room's loudspeaker. Off to the side, a man in a dark suit played funeral music on an organ. As the kiddies rode by, he slowly turned his head. His face was a rotted skull. Plastic, of course. The car took another dive, swooping down toward a glass mirror. The car stopped short. Blobby red gulls appeared in the mirror, bobbing up and down right behind Mitch. They looked more like marshmallows than monsters. "Hi, guys," Mitch said casually. The car rolled on. On to the torture chamber. Mitch loved the torture chamber. Here were lifelike models of a man on the rack, a man being tortured with thumb screws, a man suffering water torture, a man being pressed to death with rocks, and a few other delights. Old-fashioned weapons from an axe to a cat-o'-nine-tails decorated the walls. As always, Mitch ogled the weapons eagerly. Then, the car swerved slowly on the metal track, carrying the mechanic into the final room, the Chamber of Horrors. Here, a large papier-mâché statue of Jack the Ripper stood frozen in the act of slicing open a prostitute's throat. The Boston Strangler choked a victim till she was blue in the face. And best of all, Marie Antoinette lay on the guillotine, her painted eyes filled with terror as she stared up at the long blade about to drop down on her plaster neck. And just as you rode up to the guillotine, thwack! The blade dropped. At least that's what was supposed to happen. Mitch swung a leg out of the moving car and jumped out nimbly. He let the car ride by as he moved toward the guillotine. The blade was resting in an odd angle. jammed into the wooden groove on one side of the guillotine's long vertical track. He tried to force the blade straight. As he worked, something, a sound, a movement, made him look up. He looked at the statues. They were all in their usual positions, staring straight ahead, lifeless. But it was the strangest thing. He'd gotten the feeling he was being watched. Shrugging, he went back to work, and after a moment, he worked the blade loose. He moved it up and down, letting it drop down several times into the slash in Marie Antoinette's neck. Then he positioned the blade up near the top again, set the latch, and waited for the next empty car to rumble through. This time, when the car hit the lever, the blade dropped down perfectly. Whack! Mitch grinned. After the car passed, the blade started to rise once more, getting ready for the next customer. Mitch waited until the blade had worked smoothly for 3 cars. Then he climbed into a passing car and rode out of the room. Mission accomplished. He closed his eyes. The track led you out through another set of double doors, dropping its riders off behind the haunted house while the car circled around to the front again for the next customer. Mitch sat in the car until it started to move. Then he stood, swung a leg out, and stepped down to the ground, taking a few running steps before he was able to slow down. "All fixed!" he yelled to the ride operator as he strolled around to the front. He didn't wait for a response, just headed on to his next job, the bumper cars. They were running faster than normal. So far, Mitch hadn't been able to figure out why. As he walked away, the operator for the haunted house shut off the power, bringing the ride's cars to a halt. The funhouse's eerie soundtrack clicked off. The mechanical shutters on the funhouse front wall stopped banging. And in the murky darkness of the Chamber of Horrors, a dusty and powdery hand took hold of the guillotine blade. The hand jerked the blade slowly, but surely, out of position. Chapter 6. Black Toenails. Wearing only her underwear, Maxie sat on her dorm bed, carefully pushing cotton wads between her toes. Someone knocked softly at the door. "It's open," she called. She was half hoping her visitor would turn out to be some guy, like the dorm head, Mr. Janklow, who would get all embarrassed to see her so scantily clad. She kept her head down, her eyes focused on her feet. The door opened and, "Hi," said a voice. "Hey." Maxie didn't look up. She opened the tiny bottle of black nail polish and started painting her big toe. "Are you busy?" "KC," Maxie said. "Don't be so polite, okay? My dorm room is your dorm room. I mean, does it look like I'm busy?" Maxie looked up at KC and flashed a grin, trying to take the edge off her nastiness. KC laughed nervously. One glance at her, and Maxie could tell something was wrong. She wasn't in the mood to play shrink either. The pretty blonde sat down next to her on the bed. Maxie wriggled her toes. "What do you think?" Casey's eyes widened. "Black? Oh, Maxie, you crack me up." Then Casey fell silent. Head still bent over her feet, Maxie sighed. Here we go again, she thought, but she asked anyway. "Okay, what's wrong?" "Nothing. What do you mean?" "Casey," Maxie said, "I've known you since I was 2, remember? When something's bothering you, I feel it a mile away. Let me guess. You wish Graham would ask you out, and you're depressed because you don't think he ever will." Casey's mouth dropped open in shock. "Graham? Asked me out? Maxie, are you insane? He's our teacher. He's a grown-up." "So, you still have major hots for him." Graham Newton was their English teacher. A 26-year-old Britisher, he was soft-spoken, tall, and handsome, with dark hair that turned red by his sideburns. KC had been mooning over him since the first day of summer school. "Is it that obvious?" she asked with a little smile. "Are you kidding?" Maxie said. "You're just lucky he doesn't call on you more often." "Why?" "Because you're always so busy dreaming about Going out with him that you never really hear a word he says. Casey giggled. Then she covered her mouth as if she thought even giggling were rude. It's that British accent, she said thoughtfully. It makes me, she blushed, it makes me all gooey inside. I'll bet. And the way his shoulders shake when he laughs really hard, I can't help it. I just think that's so cute. Uh-huh. Poor KC, thought Maxie, still a virgin. Not like her. She'd had sex at 16 and made goddamn sure her dad found out about it. Sure, the sex itself had been totally meaningless and depressing, since she didn't care about the guy even slightly, but it sure had been worth it to see her dad hit the roof. KC fell back on the bed, covering her mouth again, then sat up just as abruptly. Oh God, Maxie, what am I going to do? Her eyes narrowed suddenly as she studied her friend. What about you? Maxie, have you got a crush on Graham? Or Mr. Newton? Maxie smiled wanly. Nope, you know me. I've never had a crush in my entire life. This was true. She'd always had a slew of boyfriends. This summer was the longest she'd ever gone without. But Maxie was beginning to think there was something wrong with her. She had yet to meet a guy who could really make her heart flutter. Well, Casey said, I think all the other girls feel like I do. Wendy told me yesterday that she's got a wicked crush on him. She said she'd give him everything she's got in the bank just to spend one night with him. Maxie guffawed. I don't think she has enough in the bank. Casey looked shocked, but she laughed. You're so mean. Listen, Casey, this is going to sound really off the wall, but did you ever think about flirting with the guy? Oh, no, never. I mean, I couldn't. Name one reason why not. Casey didn't answer. Instead, she hung her head. Anyway, he would never ask me out. Her voice was even softer than usual. Maxie carefully capped the nail polish, then turned to face her friend. Casey, listen to me. You've got to change your attitude, because it's driving me crazy. You're very pretty, and that's... There was a knock at the door. Wendy came in holding a large pile of books. She held her breath and dropped the books right on the floor. Notebooks and papers scattered everywhere. You're kidding me, she said. Maxie followed her gaze. She was looking at the carnival poster. Just decoration, she assured her with a laugh. It better be. Did I mention that I'm not going to that carnival? Maxie smiled. I think you did. Good, 'cause I'm not. Hi, Casey, she said. Hi. Wendy grunted as she bent to gather her stuff. I think I'm going to flunk bio all over again, she said. What happens if you flunk summer school? Do you have to go to winter school, or can you just go back to regular school? You're such a liar, Maxie said in her voice. You're way too smart to flunk anything. Oh, right, Wendy said. That's what you're always telling me. That's how I ended up in summer school in the first place. Wendy Denberg thought Maxie another sad case. Wendy collapsed onto one piece of furniture Maxie had bothered to transport from her house, an old black leather beanbag. A handful of white beans leaked out onto the floor. Why don't you just rip that thing up in the process? Maxie suggested dryly. It was already ripped, Wendy insisted. Maxie was about to contradict her, but before she could, a Marky Mark rap song started blasting in the distance. The sound got louder and louder until the music seemed to be pouring straight through the room's wide-open windows. Tires squealed. All three girls looked up in surprise. What the? Wendy said. Casey hurried to the window. Oh, wow, Maxie, it's Greg Dillon. He parked his car right on the grass. The music shut off abruptly. Hi, Greg, she waved, then ducked her head back inside the room. He's coming, Maxie. You better put on some clothes, Casey continued. With a lazy flick of her hair, Maxie got up off the bed. She pulled a crumpled white blouse out of the box of clothes on the floor and slipped it on. She took her time buttoning the shirt, and the front door started to open before she was half finished. Wendy hip-checked the door shut again. Just a sec, she cried. Maxie chuckled. Easy, Wendy. You'll break the poor boy's what's-it. Maxie? A voice called from the hall. It's Greg. Maxie rolled her eyes. Like we didn't notice his arrival. She pulled on a pair of baggy black gym shorts. Okay, you can let him in. Wendy opened the door. Greg was standing outside with a nervously hopeful look on his face. He was so tall and gangly, and he had close-cropped hair that looked all choppy, as if he had cut it himself, which he probably had. He was holding a large bouquet of long-stemmed red roses. Wendy grinned at him as if she were the one he had come to see, but he looked past her, at Maxie. Maxie? Greg said, shivering slightly, as if he had just come in from the cold, not from the sizzling July heat. I brought you some flowers. They're long-stem, like you. They're beautiful, Casey gushed. Isn't that romantic? Cooed Wendy. Maxie smiled. You're such a nut, she said in her voice. Really? She took the flowers and gave Greg a kiss on the cheek. His freckly skin flushed red. He shoved his hands in the pockets of his jeans and scuffed his beat-up sneakers against the floor, obviously tongue-tied with delight. I wanted to apologize for last night, he finally stammered. For last night? Maxie asked. What do you have to apologize for? I don't know. Greg was talking straight down at his sneakers, and behind his back Wendy was giggling and making her, "Oh, isn't that adorable?" face. I just thought, Greg said intensely, that I was, pressuring you too much, maybe? No way, Maxie assured him. You're the S word 100%. She means sweet, Wendy translated as she flopped back down on the beanbag. Now, what should Maxie glanced around for someplace to put the flowers. An empty can of tennis balls looked promising. Maxie, Greg said, I had a vision. I'm serious. It came to me in a dream. By the end of today, you're going to be in love with me. Stop laughing. I am serious. But Maxie didn't stop laughing. Not until the light knock came at the half-open door. Maxie turned. Her mouth dropped open. Standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, and a sheepish grin on his handsome face, was their English teacher, Graham Newton. Hello, Maxie, he said. Hi. I hope I'm not coming at a bad time. Wendy was struggling up out of the beanbag. Mr. Newton! Oh, hello, Wendy. How are you? Nice to see you. And Mr. Dillon, hello there. Greg nodded. His eyes were turning a dark burning color. Graham stepped into the room. He always tried to keep his accent light around his students and tried his best at an American accent, but it just sounded awkward and weird. Hands still in his pockets, grinning awkwardly. I'm sorry to barge in on you like this, Maxie. I tried calling, but I took the phone off the hook, Maxie admitted. Ah, Graham glanced around. Everyone was standing frozen like statues. So this is dorm living, eh? Yeah, Maxie said. You like the way I've decorated the place? Graham laughed hard, his shoulders going up and down. Yes, very much. Minimalist, eh? Huh? Maxie asked. Graham was always saying things she and the other students had never even heard of. He was probably some kind of genius or something. Casey was blushing deep red. You came to see Maxie? She asked, and then blushed even redder. Uh-oh, thought Maxie. Jealousy City. Casey's smile was stuck on her face like a mask. What? Graham asked. Oh, yes, He gave Maxie a quick glance. I have something I need to talk to you about, Maxie, but it can definitely wait for another. He was edging back toward the door when Greg, his dark eyes gleaming with suspicion, finally found his speaking voice. So what are you doing here exactly? It came out sounding pretty rude, adding to the tension in the room, which was already enormous. Maxie was shocked. Greg was usually such a polite and respectful guy. He just said he had to talk to me about something, Maxie told Greg quickly. What is it? She asked Graham. Is there something wrong with my term paper? No, 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 Graham said. Well, yes, actually, that is it. It's about your term paper. But there's nothing wrong, exactly. I just wanted to talk to you about it. He clapped his hands together. Anyway, everyone was staring at the teacher. Well, I'll be off then. But say, Maxie, if you could come by my office sometime later this afternoon, that would be a great help. He backed through the doorway. Casey and Wendy gave him a farewell chorus of goodbye, Mr. Newton, and then he was gone. There was a stunned silence. Maxie looked down, surprised to see the bouquet of roses still in her hand. She'd forgotten all about them. It never stops, she thought. This spring, because she was acting up so much, her dad had made her go to a psychiatrist. He gave up on that idea after Maxie told him that the shrink had asked her out. Now it looked like Graham would do the same thing. Can you believe that bastard? Greg said, storming around the room like he was looking for someone to hit. Who? Casey asked wide-eyed. Mr. Newton, Greg said. He sat on Maxie's desk for a moment, then jumped up again. Of all the sleazeballs! Casey's lower lip started trembling. He's not a sleazeball. She said it quietly but firmly. Maxie wouldn't have been surprised if Casey started crying in a second or two. And don't cuss, Casey said. You know I can't stand it. Casey was a regular churchgoer. Dang it, was as close as she would ever come to real swearing. Fine, Greg snapped. He's not a sleazeball, but teachers aren't supposed to hit on their students, you know. He wasn't hitting on me, Maxie said, glancing at Casey. You heard him. It's about my paper. She didn't believe that for a second, but if Greg would just shut up for a minute, maybe she could get Casey to believe it. Bull, Greg said. He took a pencil from Maxie's desk and flipped it up so that it stuck in the ceiling's soft tile. Well, that's enough excitement for me for one day, Wendy said. I'm going to go home and do some studying. She looked much more glum than usual, which was pretty glum. Maxie suddenly remembered what Casey had told her about Wendy's crush on their teacher. Come by here around 7, Maxie told her. Right, Wendy said miserably. Then we party. Hearing the word party, Greg's head jerked up. He stared at Maxie, deep hurt shining in his big puppy dog eyes. I told you we had plans, Maxie pointed out. Wendy looked at Maxie, then at Greg, and said, Hey, why don't you? Maxie grabbed Wendy's arm and marched her toward the door. 7, she repeated, glaring at her. Don't be late. Casey left next. She looked even more morose than Wendy had. Still holding the roses at her side, Wendy walked out into the hall with her and shut the door behind them. Casey, he really did come by about the paper. Yeah, right. He did. Casey was drifting down the hall. Maxie followed her. Where are you going? She whispered fiercely. Come on, don't leave me alone with... She nodded her head back at the room. Him. But Casey wasn't paying any attention. See you tonight, she said, lifting a hand limply goodbye. She barely managed to smile. When Maxie came back into the room, Greg was crouched down reading the carnival poster. The guy just couldn't take a hint, now could he? He looked up, gave her a jagged smile. I'm here to give you one last chance. Come with me to the carnival tonight. His voice broke. Maxie smiled, but shook her head. Chapter 7. Haunted. The door to the infirmary van opened and Vince Fantana came out. Vince Fantana, owner and manager of the Fantana Traveling Funhouse and Carnival, was a short, balding man with silver mutton chops and tiny pig-like eyes. He was wearing a white cowboy shirt with mother-of-pearl buttons and a black string tie. He was eating his 4th Hostess crumb cake of the afternoon. His paunch made a kind of shelf that caught the falling crumbs. At the sound of the door opening, Selina Tokar, who'd been waiting on the van steps, jumped to her feet. She's going to be fine, Vince told her, wiping his hands on his stomach. Nurse Molly says she's just a little tired from setup. Nothing she can't fix, believe me." He winked. Fantana winked so often some people thought he had a twitch. "I want her to go to a hospital," Selina said firmly. Vince took another bite of crumb cake and smiled at her with his mouth full. "No point. Nurse says she's fine. And anyway, your mom doesn't have health insurance, so—" The owner's walkie-talkie blared. "The inspector's here, Mr. Fantana." "I'm coming right away." He was about to go, but he turned back to Selina. "Trust me, okay?" He gave her a brief smile, crinkling his piggy eyes, then hurried off. "Mr. Fantana?" The owner stopped and turned. "My mom was saying, before she fainted." "Yes?" "Well, I don't know how to say this, but—" "Just say it, Selina, 'cause I'm in a real hurry." "Okay, well, it seems like Mom thinks this whole place is haunted or something." Selina blushed, aware of how silly that sounded. Mr. Fantana grinned. "Your mother!" He chuckled. "I can see the headlines now." Swiping the air with one stubby hand, he indicated a banner headline. "Psychic becomes psychic," he laughed. If your mom would start giving people nicer predictions, she'd get more business." He winked at her, but Selina frowned. "Look," Mr. Fantana said, "I'll tell you what. If she doesn't feel up to it, you can run the booth tonight. How's that?" "That's great," Selina smiled, feeling somewhat relieved. Fantana pointed a stubby forefinger at her and made a clicking sound with his tongue. "I'm counting on you, Selina." Selina watched as the short old man hurried off through the campgrounds, waving greetings at all the carnies he passed. She continued to watch as he walked past Mitch's trailer, where Stump was still barking. "Somebody tell Mitch to shut that damn dog up!" Vince yelled. But the dog kept barking and barking. And inside the van, the white mask still lay where Mitch had tossed it the night before, on the metal counter next to the trailer's kitchen sink. Though there was little light in the van, the mask was gleaming. Chapter 8. Let the Games Begin. That evening, at exactly 6 o'clock, the Vince Fantana Traveling Funhouse and Carnival opened for business. Vince had rented 2 huge spotlights, which he set up near the entrance to the fair. The thick white beams revolved slowly, just barely visible in the dusky sky. Vince said the lights would attract townspeople and country folk for miles. Vince was wrong. From the first hour the fair was open, it was clear to Mitch Deaver that the turnout was going to be lousy. Lousy was actually putting it mildly, he thought, as he strolled through the half-deserted grounds. After a life spent around carnival machines, Mitch could tell what was wrong with the ride just by listening. Tonight he was hearing nothing but problems. Gears grinding, cars scraping against their tracks. Well, that was one good thing about the sparse crowd. He could shut down the rides whenever he needed to make repairs or do a lube job. Then, a little after 8, he spotted a nasty crack in the metal base of the scrambler. He needed his blowtorch for this one. He headed back to his van. It was about a 5-minute walk from the fair to the clearing through the thick woods all the way. Long before he got there, he could hear Stump barking. The huge dog was waiting for him right outside the van. When he saw Mitch, he started running back and forth from Mitch to the van, overcome with excitement. Mitch unlocked the van door and went in, the dog squeezing in beside him. Stump bounded over to the counter and put his paws up, barking at the white mask. Mitch laughed. So that was it. The dog was after its bone, the mask it had dug up last night. But Mitch had no time to play games. He found his cardboard box of tools, pulled out the blowtorch, and was reaching for his metal mask and green eye shield when he had a funny idea. He dropped the gray mask back into the box and crossed to the counter, where the hockey mask lay. Stump was yapping like crazy now. He had to push the dog out of the way. He put down the blowtorch, then he lifted the mask. With its black eye holes, the mask seemed to stare back at him like an evil face. Mitch flipped the mask over, wondering if the white lucite was strong enough to protect him while he was welding. What the hell? He'd try anything once. He positioned the white disc over his face and carefully fitted the plastic strap in back of his greasy head. Then he picked up the blowtorch and turned to go when something made him stop cold. It was faint at first, like that first instant of queasiness when you know you're going to throw up. But something deep inside of him felt different. Barking loudly, Stump kept jumping up and planting his paws on Mitch's chest. He looked down at the dog staring at him through the mask. Instantly, Stump skittered backward, pressing himself up against the bed, whimpering with fear. That's strange, thought Mitch. Why would Stump be so scared? Then he felt it. His skin was crawling. He looked down at his long, muscle-bound arms. The tattoos were moving. Green, inky snakes slithered all over his flesh. Then he felt the first bite. The snakes bit hard and deep into his stomach, his arms, and his legs. He opened his mouth to scream, but a snake slid right in, the leathery skin gliding across his teeth. He started choking as the snake coiled down his throat and into his body. He could hear tiny jaws snapping. He was being eaten alive, inside and out. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the creature stopped biting. The tattoos became tattoos once again. Mitch was drenched with sweat, but other than that, he was whoomp. Though he hadn't lit it, the blowtorch sprang to life in his hand. The torch's blue spear of flame blazed in the darkness of the van. Behind the mask, Mitch leered happily, his eyes reflecting the torch's blue light. It was as if the light had gone on inside his brain as well, because now he knew what he had to do. Hey, tonight was going to be more fun than he ever thought. Okay, this has been chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 of Friday the 13th The Carnival by Eric Morse. And I gotta tell you, if I didn't want to keep my uploads around 45 minutes to an hour, I could keep going with this book all night. I really could. If it didn't kill my voice doing the different characters, then I would just finish this book right now. I mean, it's just such a fresh breath of air after the Jason X Death Moon stuff. It's a really good story. It's very engaging, just like Mother's Day and Jason's Curse was. Mr. Pattison, Eric Morse, he did a fabulous job with these Friday the 13th books. And there was 4 of them that were published. Mother's Day, Jason's Curse, The Carnival, and Road Trip. But it's never been published. But Eric Morse himself, William Pattison, wrote a 5th novel in the series called The Mask of Jason Voorhees. And it's about twice as long as these books were. And it's not quite as much like the young adult thing, but it's still his writing style. And it's the 5th and final book in this series, but it was never published. And I'm going to be doing that book after I finish The Carnival and Road Trip. So I'm looking forward to that. But anyways, back to now, The Carnival. I'm really enjoying how the story has just jumped right into it. We're only like 60 pages into a 184-page book, and the carnival's already going. The mask is going on his face, and things are about to get interesting, I can just tell. I mean, I was a little bummed out that the mask didn't go on on Mitch's face in the first chapter like it did with the other 2 people that put the mask on in the first chapter of the last 2 books. But I think this works better because it gave us time to see what kind of a sleazeball Mitch is, and also lets us see what others think of him. Even Selena said he's a creep, and she could tell by the way he ogled her and stuff. So it's really the polar opposite. Last book it was Big Red, and we sympathized with him. This book it's a sleazeball, and we don't. How are all of our main characters going to get to the fair? Maxie seems adamant that she don't want to go. Wendy definitely don't want to go, and Casey's mad at both of them because of that teacher having a crush on them, or a crush on Maxie. Also, guys, I just can't do a British accent. That's why the teacher is trying to hide his accent around his students and trying to force an American accent. But yeah. Anyways, guys, let me know what you thought of tonight's upload in the comments below, and I will talk to you about it there. I love discussing it with you guys. I'll see you very soon with more of Friday the 13th The Carnival. And until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, this is a bad carnival. In fact, this old drunk guy told me that
it's got a death curse.